So the one thing that you can do to make painting beards a lot easier is to think of it like this. Think of it as a solid form with defined flat planes. I've actually talked about this in terms of painting hair. I made a video where I painted 3 different versions of Brad Pitt's hair. If you want to check that out, I'll put a link to it above right now. So again, when I'm looking at a beard, I am trying to think of it in terms of big flat planes. This is going to help me find the right color and the right value, which in the end will help me create the proper form of the beard. So many times I see students that are painting a beard and it's just kind of a mess of colors and values and there's no real form to it. They get too caught up in the texture of hair and they start like dabbing their brush and just caring all about texture when it's really the form that counts. It's the same idea as the planes of the face. Understanding those planes and how light is hitting them is going to help you better paint portraits. To go even more simple, it's the same when painting still life, which is why one of my favorite exercises is painting planed fruit. It's fruit that I sculpted out of clay to get the student to really understand the form and what is happening with the light and the values. So many times I see students that are painting a beard and it's just kind of a mess of colors and values and there's no real form to it. But before I jump into this tutorial, let's take a look at some beards painted by some masters. So here's a portrait done by John Singer Sargent. And this beard is very simple. Like you'd look at it and think, oh wow, like there's not a lot of detail. It actually looks kind of messy. How is it reading so well? And that's because the form is defined. You know, we have a distinct light side of the beard and a distinct shadowed side of the beard. And there's subtle shifts in value. Like right here is slightly darker than out here, which is going to give it that form. Same thing is happening here. We got this dark and then this light and then this dark. And so if you think of it blocky like that, you know, you have this dark and this light, it's going to make it have form. If you've watched any of my tutorials on still lifes, I talk a lot about reflected light. Same thing goes here. Look at this reflected light happening in the beard. It's the same color as the shirt. And having this reflected light is going to better portray this plane of the beard and give it more form. It's also working because it has a lot of soft edges. Look how soft the edge is here. Look how soft the edge is here. You actually lose the edge into the shirt. This painting is done by Cecilia Bose, and this is one of my favorites. I mean, look how soft that is, and just like how light and feathery. It uses these distinct brush strokes right there to just add that highlight and add that form. You know, we got this side all in shadow, got a lot of reflected light happening there, but then this one spot that is into the light, just giving it that form. You know, we got shadow, light, a lot of soft edges. I just feel like this is a great example of how much you can portray with so little if you get the form and the edges right. All right, now that we've looked at some of the best beards ever painted, let's watch me paint a beard. I'm sure I'm not gonna regret this. And even during the drawing, I'm trying to think of the beard as blocky. I'm using straight lines and distinct angles. Pay a lot of attention to angles when I draw. Like what's the angle of the beard there? You got like this angle. That shifts to this angle. And just how I like to block out the shadowed side and the light side of the face, I do the same with the beard. I'm not even really thinking about the planes just yet. I'm just thinking there's a shadowed side and there's a light side. And when I block out the light side, I don't go to the lightest value, just like I didn't go to the darkest value in the shadowed side. I actually like to go to the darkest light that I can. That way I can build dark to light. Also notice on this light side how similar in color I have the beard to the skin. I feel like this happens a lot, especially with this one. It's a white beard and it's gonna be catching a lot of reflected light from the face. Also notice the soft edges where the beard meets the skin. That's how you're gonna help portray it as hair. And you're going to get those soft edges by working wet into wet paint. Working wet into wet paint is so helpful. And I know a lot of people are scared of doing that when they first get to oils because they're used to watercolors and acrylics, which is more of a paint a layer, let it dry, and build on top of that. But if you're just starting out, I highly suggest getting out of your comfort zone and working wet into wet paint. It's gonna be hard at first, but I promise in the long run, you're going to love it and it's going to expand your painting ability. I made a whole video on working wet into wet paint and painting soft edges. If you wanna check that out, I'll put a link to it above right now. All right, little side note, if you struggle with mixing skin tones in your portraits, I'm not gonna go over it in this video, but I do offer these skin tones lesson from my portrait painting course for free. In it, I go over what colors I like to have on my palette for portraits and how I go about mixing skin tones. So if you wanna check that out, the link to it is in the description of this video. So you can see, even at this very early stage, I'm already starting to identify the form with, you know, I got a darker square value right there. Next to this light, you know, that's creating the form right there, same right there. I got, you know, down here on the chin, I got this light side, gets a little darker there, and then even darker over here. I'm working a little bit of reflected light on the edge here. Got a soft edge going into the background right there. And even as I develop the beard and add in more shapes, I try very hard not to get too caught up in it that I lose the overall form. It can get tricky and it can fool you because you're gonna see a whole bunch of different color shifts and value shifts, and you'll wanna capture all of them. And if you get too caught up into that, you're going to lose the big form. So the beard is pretty developed by this point, but there's still areas that are really blocky. You know, like right here, these two planes are blocky, but that's fine. Like I can always finesse that and get it to be smoother, but I like that the form is being portrayed. Got these dark areas that I've worked to be more subtle, but they're still portraying form. Like this whole left side of the beard is reading with a lot of good form, but because there's a lot of soft edges, it's looking more natural. You know, I lose this edge on the collar here real nice. The chin here is still pretty rigid and blocky, but the form is being portrayed. Got distinct planes right there. Really like this reflected light right there next to this dark right there, which is giving volume to that part of the beard. You know, this dark shape in there is giving form to it. Soft edge right there. So kind of the way my process goes is that I'll be blocky with an area, I'll figure out the form, and then I'll finesse it, you know, working wet into wet paint and blending edges to get it to read as hair. And as I'm developing the beard more and more and adding in smaller shapes and more specific values, I'm trying really hard not to go into too much detail. It's really hard at the end of portraits because a lot of times you have a really small brush and you're doing little details in the face and you want to go down to the beard and indicate a few individual hairs, which you can still do. That's totally fine. Just understand that adding more detail isn't what's going to make it work. A lot of people can fall into the trap of thinking like, oh, like it's not looking that good right now. Well, I'll just add a bunch of detail, and by the time I get a bunch of detail in, it'll look nice and good. And people kind of trick themselves in thinking that something is working and looks right just because it's very detailed. Don't fall into that trap. So this is a really fun portrait to do. I used to struggle a lot painting beards and didn't like painting them. Now I have so much fun painting them. If you'd like to give this painting a try, the full tutorial is on my Patreon page, which is linked in the description below. And if you'd like to see what I'm painting on a daily basis, you can follow me on Instagram at Forza43. I'm Chris Fornatero, here telling you to go get painting.